Welcome back to another edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast, the post-draft edition. Andy Bull Barch, joined alongside Scott Petrak with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and, of course, BrownZone.com. Scott coming off a very, very busy work weekend where he was hard after it covering the NFL draft. And, Scott, that will give us a ton to talk about here over the next 20, 25 minutes. How different was it covering that draft this year?
It was different. Plenty of it was the same, right? It was really busy, and as soon as the Browns make a pick, you're working and you're doing interviews and transcribing and writing, and you're up late and you're posting and you're trying to check on Twitter. Like, that part of it was the same, but obviously I'm doing it in my basement instead of in the media room surrounded by media. I'm by myself. It just had a different flow to it. When you're in the room, you're focused. You're focused, and you have the TVs on. But there's always somebody, and usually I get somebody from the paper helping me. There's always somebody going, "Hey, the Browns are coming up to pick," or this transcription's done, or so you have kind of some more help. Let me say, as opposed to being by yourself in the basement and you're trying to watch TV and you're trying to tweet and watch Twitter, but you're also trying to get your work done, right? And there's deadline pressure because it's primetime Thursday night and it's Friday, and they made their last pick after midnight, I want to say, on Friday. So you felt a little bit like you're on an island, even though you're doing the Zoom calls with the players and with the coach and the GM. So it was definitely different, kind of like we saw how the draft itself was completely different, right? I mean, the fact that there weren't the red carpets and, Goodell's in his basement, it was a different experience for everybody, including the beat writers.
Seemed like the pace of the draft was a bit quicker than it had been in years past, and I think we weren't quite sure what to expect there. The presentation was different, but I thought it was okay. The only thing I thought that came off a little strange was the artificial interaction between Roger Goodell and every fan base that he put up on that video board behind him. I just thought that was really forced and almost too cheesy for that. Did that seem the same way to you?
Yes, I would agree with the interaction with the fans, and I don't know how much of that was technology. If the delay was just enough that when he would say boo, they didn't boo right away, so then he was kind of caught off guard, and the rhythm wasn't correct. So that was awkward. And that's a tough spot for him to be in. He's standing, and then he's tired of standing, so he's sitting, and then he changes clothes. Like, it was just a tough spot, I think, for him. And you're the only person on camera, and there's nobody, coming on. There's no interaction. There's no personal connection. So I think he probably did as well as he could for being a commissioner. I mean, he's not Jimmy Fallon, right, or Jimmy Kimmel. So I agree with you on that being awkward. I also found, and maybe this is just the cynical nature in me, I liked the family interaction with the coaches and GMs early on. Like, it felt new to me, right? Because it is. Because usually we see them in the draft rooms and they're surrounded by their colleagues as opposed to in their living room or in their den, wherever they were. And they would have the families come in, and it was kind of cool to see it first. Then it felt forced to me, like the NFL had issued some kind of memo, like, okay, everybody have their kids there. Adam Gase, the Jets coach, looked like he wanted no part of his kids. They're sitting behind him on the couch. He's not even paying attention to them. So, I thought there was kind of a balance that needed to be struck between genuine and forced. And some of it was fine, and some of it, I was like, eh. And even the Belichick, I know Belichick's dog got all kinds of love. But even to me, I don't know. It just struck me as, did Belichick, put him there? Did somebody tell him to put him there? Did the dog just kind of happen to pop up there? Did they know it was going to be this great visual? I just kind of went back and forth to kind of my reaction to the new way that they had to do it.
Yeah, a lot of it seemed forced. At least that was the way it looked to me. I mean, it just seemed like it was very, very forced. And seems like the Browns were forced in a good way to make what appears to be, at least on paper, a pretty good pick with the first round. And that number 10 pick, I think there weren't many that expected Wills to fall down to him there. I know in a lot of mock drafts, Will certainly wasn't around at 10, and talking to those who follow the betting markets, Will certainly wasn't expected to fall that far. How surprised were you to see him available at number 10 for the Browns?
A little bit. You know what I was more surprised about Bull was that only one of those top 4 tackles was taken in the first 9. I thought for sure Arizona would take a tackle, and instead it went with Isaiah Simmons, the linebacker from Clemson, that frankly, if he was there at 10, maybe the Browns have a tougher decision to make and figure out a different way to address tackle, because Simmons is that kind of player that you trying to change your draft board for. And I think that's what Arizona did because, not to say they don't need a special linebacker, but I think Arizona needs another tackle. It needs a right tackle to help protect Kyler Murray. So the fact that only one tackle was taken was a surprise to me. I was also surprised that the Giants, it was Andrew Thomas that they took at number 4. I thought Becton was in play. I thought Wills was in play. I thought Wirfs was in play. Not to say that Thomas wasn't a big-time tackle. It didn't kind of feel like a Giants pick to me. So I was surprised by that. Saying all that, it worked out well for the Browns. Because if you need a left tackle, you can sit at number 10 and get your guy. And I think the Browns felt compelled to do that. We talked a lot about will they trade down. And I think I know that's always going to be an inclination for that, for this organization, right? The analytics tell you to. It makes sense to them to trade down and acquire more picks. But the way this draft shook out, and with the Browns' biggest need being left tackle, Andrew Berry and Paul DePodesta and Kevin Stefanski just realized we're here at 10 and we can get a big-time player, the guy that they say was number 1 on their board at left tackle, or at tackle because he was a right tackle, but go get him. And it just made too much sense. And why try to get cute? Why try to beat the system and trade down to 15 and miss out on one of those tackle prospects, which I think they would have, because then you saw Becton and Wirfs go back-to-back. So I think it wound up falling perfectly for the Browns, and then they were disciplined enough to just say, you know what, let's sit here and take it. And now for me, the only question is, can Jedrick Wills move from right tackle to left tackle? He's only been a right tackle in his life. I think he's athletic enough to make the switch, but it's not a given. I know the Browns believe they kind of dismiss it and they downplay the move from right side to left side. But if you talk to some offensive linemen, they'll tell you it is a significant hurdle because you're relearning everything. You're changing after all those years, dropping with your right foot. You drop with your left foot. So I like the kid from Louisville. I like Mekhi Becton a lot. I just thought there's a wow factor, and you don't get many 6'7", 360-pound tackles. But after him, for me, it was Wills. And I think maybe he doesn't have quite the upside as Becton, but I also don't think he's got the floor as Becton. There's some questions about Becton, and I don't have those with Wills. The only question I have is, can he play left tackle? And if he can, then I think it's a home run pick.
Couple of things about that, and I want to begin with this because trading down is always something you hear as a possibility, and I guess on the surface it doesn't look like that would have been a horrible thing for the Browns to do here, especially because, as you mentioned, a lot of the tackles that they had targeted were still available at number 10. How tempted do you think they were at number 10 to trade back a few spots, knowing that they could probably still get one of the guys that looked like they were an attainable target at that position?
Well, I think that's where the dilemma is. Number one, I do think they were tempted. And I think, like I kind of mentioned, they'll always be tempted. That's just the nature of analytics and the belief that the more picks, the better. But I think if you looked at the board and you said, okay, the Jets are going to take a tackle at 11. The Buccaneers, I believe they were 14. They were going to take a tackle. So unless you found that spot at 13, if you went all the way back to 15 with Denver, then you probably would have lost 2 of your tackles. And as it turns out, San Francisco, Joe Staley's retiring, they might have taken a tackle. So if you went to 15, maybe you think we can get our 4th-rated tackle, and that's fine if you pick up a 3rd-round pick to go from 10 to 15. But then you don't get the number 1 guy you love. You probably don't get the number 1 guy you love. And there's a danger of all 4 of those top tackles being taken. And I think the Browns' decision to stay at 10 tells you, number 1, how much they like Wills. And number 2, that they had a big gap from maybe they only have 3 of those top 4 guys, but whether it's 3 or 4, there was a significant gap then to that 5th and 6th guy. Because I think if they had felt comfortable with Ezra Cleveland or Austin Jackson or Josh Jones, and Austin Jackson's the only one of those 3 guys that went in the first round to Miami, if they had felt super comfortable with any of those guys, they would have went to 15 and picked up the extra pick. But I don't think they did, so they stayed at 10 and said, let's take our guy instead of having to take a second-tier rookie or figure out a way to trade for Trent Williams, right? Because I think that's the other option is, okay, if we trade down and don't get one of these rookies, we can always trade for Trent Williams. And yes, that was an option, and I think it would have been an option in case, let's say they take an Isaiah Simmons at 10, then I think you bring in the Trent Williams situation. But then you get a guy who's 31 years old, a guy who hasn't played a ton lately, a guy who's going to want a new contract for big money, whether it's 15 or 18 or 20 million a year. And I think organizationally, and it always made sense to me, just sit at 10 and take the guy at 10, and you're paying him much less. And he's a rookie, and he's healthier. Now, maybe the Grand Slam scenario is to trade to 15 and still get that guy, but the Browns decided it wasn't worth the risk, and I tend to agree with them.
You mentioned risk. Doesn't seem like there was a ton of risk involved with that pick. There's always at least some. And you alluded to the risk, I think, that appears to be the biggest at this point, and that's the fact that they want him to play left tackle, yet he's done nothing but play right tackle so far in his career. How much of that do you think matters at this point? You mentioned the Browns have kind of downplayed that. We expect that. I know Joe Thomas has reached out to kind of help him with the transition as well. How big of a deal do you think that really is?
Well, I'll tell you this. Well, I mean, it's going to be, let's assume we have some kind of an off season, right, including a training camp. That's going to be that's a top 5 question for the Browns, and it's the top question for Jedrick Wills. Can he make the switch from right tackle to left tackle? We always watch rookies, and we always watch the first-round pick, but this is a question for him, and he admits it, right? And he started to work on it. I think Andrew Berry, one of the Browns guys, said that Wills, starting in the offseason, has gone 60-40 left tackle versus right tackle in his workouts because he knew many teams would ask him to play left tackle. Not every team, but many teams, including the Browns. So he spent time working on that. What the Browns are relying on them on, and I believe this makes a lot of sense, is offensive line coach Bill Callahan. Number one, he's a veteran coach. He's been a head coach. He's been a coordinator. Respected, one of the most respected line coaches in the league. Not only do they have him to work with Wills, whether it's virtually for the foreseeable future, and then once he gets his hands on him in minicamp or training camp, whenever it starts. So you have that aspect, that he can coach him up. You also have the fact that Callahan took Tyron Smith with the Cowboys, and after he played right tackle as a rookie, helped him make the switch to left tackle, and he's become a 7-time Pro Bowl. And the Browns relied heavily on that. That was something DePodesta and Barry brought up immediately after they took Wills. So there's a comfort level there that he's been through this before. Now, obviously, Wills, I don't know if he's the same caliber player as Smith is, and everybody is physically different, so he might not be able to do it. But they have confidence that Callahan will help him do it. And, they saw athletically what they needed to see, whether it was him pulling in the zone, whether it was the drills they do at the combine. There's enough for them to say, yes, he can handle this. And then it almost becomes an issue of muscle memory. And Joe Thomas has said often he believes it takes 3 months coming out of college to break that habit. If you're a right guy, to go to the left side. If you're a left side guy, to go to the right side. And, now the time frame will be condensed, and Wills is going to have to do a lot of it on his own. But if Thomas is right, then Wills should be fine, and the Browns should have their left tackle for the next decade. I'm just not willing to say it's a slam dunk. I think this will be something that bears watching until, he's comfortable, until I'm comfortable saying, okay, he gets it, he's a left tackle. And frankly, it might be till year 2 before he's completely comfortable. But if he is at any point, if he's as a rookie or year 2, then you can say, yes, the pick was worth it, and it wasn't worth taking just a strictly left tackle like Mekhi Becton because you feel Wills is a better pick if you're the Browns.
Well, the Browns addressed a number of different areas where they really felt like they needed to upgrade in the draft, but there are a couple I know that you've singled out where you still feel like some work needs to be done at defensive end and linebacker. Why is it that you feel those two positions still need a little bit more work?
Well, we can start with D end, and to me, the newsiest thing regarding defensive end is that they didn't draft one. They haven't signed Jadeveon Clowney, and Stefanski and Barry both said that Olivier Vernon is going to be their guy this year. So that was a big question mark, right? We've talked about it. He's due $15.25 million in 2020. He missed 6 games last year. He only had 3.5 sacks. Is he worth bringing back? And I think the Browns looked at the free agent market. I think they looked at the draft class and said, Vernon's our best option for 2020. Now, maybe if the draft board had fallen differently, they would have taken a guy, if they traded down to 15. Maybe they take a defensive end at 15, and then they think differently about it. But the way it worked out, they're comfortable, or they need to be comfortable, with Vernon as the starting defensive end opposite Myles Garrett. But to me, they still need a long-term plan. They still need depth. Right now you got Myles Garrett. You have Olivier Vernon. You have Adrian Claiborne. Now that's a solid 3-man veteran group. And Claiborne signed for 2 years. And then you have Chad Thomas, who so far has been just a guy, right? Now, is he fine as a fourth end? Maybe. There's not a whole lot of upside from a pass rush standpoint. So I guess my point is I would like to see them infuse some young talent there. And maybe it can't happen at this stage of the offseason. Maybe you hope you hit on a undrafted free agent, right? And I'm sure the Browns have a defensive end there. I saw the list, but it's not popping in my head right now. And you never know about those guys, right? And plus, we're not going to have the offseason for them to be on the field probably, and that's tougher for an undrafted rookie than to make the team. But I'm sure, right, my point is I think the Browns need to add more numbers there to try to find a young guy and find some depth, a guy that can challenge Chad Thomas to be that fourth end and a substitutional pass rusher. And when we get to linebacker, they just don't have a whole lot of depth there, right? They let Joe Schobert walk in free agency. They released Christian Kirksey. And those picks or those moves make sense to some degree. They weren't going to pay Schobert the $9 or $10 million that he was going to get on the open market. They didn't want to pay Kirksey the $8 million he was due because he's been hurt a bunch. So you can explain those to me, and you can rationalize those. I would have brought back Schobert, but that's fine. They moved on. Well, now somebody needs to play linebacker. You got Mack Wilson, you got Taki, and you got B.J. Goodson. Goodson's the only kind of veteran in that group. And then they go and they draft Jacob Phillips from LSU at the bottom of the third round. So he adds to that pile. I think there's a chance he could come in and start right away. It's a young competition, but there's nobody there that you say is a slam dunk starter, right? Mack Wilson played pretty good as a rookie, but my point is I would like to see more numbers on that pile at linebacker. I think they're committed to a youth movement, but put more people there and see who kind of pops out. And I think that's how they're going to approach this offseason. I'm just not sure that if I were the coach or the GM, I'd be super comfortable with the 4 top guys that I have right now. Maybe they'll make it work. Maybe they have to make it work. I just look at the whole roster and go, well, if there's one area that I'm worried about, it would be linebacker.
Well, Scott, we can close out on this, and this is something that you actually wrote about a few moments before we started recording this podcast, and that's the idea that the expectations for Baker Mayfield will be very, very high this season. Not that they weren't last year, but both Barry and Stefanski have noted their expectations for Baker Mayfield. Now, it's the third year coming up in the career of Baker Mayfield. We all know that. Last year, not anywhere near what I think all of us expected, maybe a bit of a letdown from a nice rookie season. So the expectations will be lofty, to say the least, and I'm not quite so sure that we can phrase this as a make-or-break season for Baker Mayfield, but it's awfully close.
You're right. I was just going to say that. If you can't name it that, it's about as close as you can get. Maybe he has an average year and you can't make a full decision, so then year 4 becomes make or break. But the fact is the Browns are going to have to decide after year 3 whether or not they want to pick up his 5th-year option. And it's just one of those kind of, it's not artificial, one of those timelines that you look at and go, okay, this is forcing us to make a decision about our quarterback. There's a ton of things that go through my mind when you broach this subject, Bull. Number one, I remember playing golf with one of my buddies last year, and we were having the Baker conversation, and he said, there's no way that he won't be better in year 2. He goes, if he doesn't get hurt, there's no way he won't be better. And I was kind of playing devil's advocate, and I said, well, Joe, we've seen a lot, the guy's, my buddy's name's Joe, we've seen a lot of rookie quarterbacks play well and regress, right? You've seen it happen before. You've seen it with positions that aren't quarterback. Stuff happens. It's not a steady progression for some players, and some players peak as rookies. It just happens. Now, Baker, as a rookie, gave us no reason to think that. I was just kind of drawing on experience, saying there's no sure things. Well, it turns out that I happen to be right there. And I brought that up with my buddy, and he actually admitted that he was wrong. But Baker regressed. And yes, there were plenty of factors, and it wasn't all Baker, right? Freddie Kitchens was a factor. Maybe Ryan Lindley, the quarterback's coach, is a factor. A lack of chemistry with the OBJ and Jarvis Landry, whether that was due to lack of practice time in the offseason or during the season because they're dealing with injuries. The line was spotty at times, and Baker didn't appear comfortable early until he kind of grew into a comfort level with the protection in front of him. But Baker also wasn't super accurate. We can argue whether or not he came in the best shape he needed to. All those things. So, yes, this becomes a huge year for him, and because he can't play at the level he did last year. And on top of that, when Andrew Berry, he went on ESPN Radio this morning, and said, I expect a fantastic year from Baker. That's good. He also includes, we've done a lot to improve the environment around Baker. And it started with the coaching change. And then you throw in free agency, which is, Nate, here's a right tackle. Here's a Pro Bowl right tackle in Jack Conklin. And here's a big-time tight end in Austin Hooper. And we're giving you a backup quarterback that knows how Kevin Stefanski coaches, knows the system to a degree, and has had success in this league in Case Keenum. And then we're going to go draft a tackle at number 10 and trust him to block your blind side. And we're going to go get another tight end in the 4th round. And we're not going to trade OBJ. And we're going to keep Kareem Hunt. All this is to make the environment as good as possible for Baker Mayfield to succeed. And now it's up to Baker Mayfield. And Kevin Stefanski went on a radio station this morning, too, and he said he thinks Baker's matured, and he thinks Baker will succeed in his offense. But the biggest takeaway to me is he said it's all going to come down to hard work. He goes, we can't speak this into existence. It's going to be about Baker working hard. And I'm not questioning if Baker worked hard in the past. What I'll say is it's Kevin Stefanski sending a message to Baker Mayfield, which he's done privately too, I'm sure. But it's also, you look at the separator for these quarterbacks, for the best quarterbacks in the league. It's not just arm talent. It's not just intelligence. It's so much about hard work. And we see it in everything you read about Tom Brady and see about Tom Brady and everything you see and read about Drew Brees. And at the point gets driven home when you watch The Last Dance about Michael Jordan, it's all about hard work. And I think Baker needs to realize that. And if he's going to live up to the number 1 pick in the draft and succeed with all these weapons that he has, then it's up to him. And it starts with the work he's doing in the offseason, and then will bleed into training camp in the season. But I thought it was a fascinating dual message between Andrew Berry saying, yes, we expect a fantastic year, and Kevin Stefanski also saying it's going to be all about Baker Mayfield's hard work.
Well, I think the underlying theme here is that there really aren't any more excuses because they really have kind of addressed every single area they could address on offense, and it seems like there really aren't any excuses left for Baker Mayfield, which is why year 3 becomes as close to a make-or-break year as it could possibly be. I think the only excuse that you could have left on the table would be an injury. Certainly nobody wants to see that, but Scott, I can't think of any other excuse outside of that.
I agree with you, Bo, and just let me make this final point. I think there's also, and it's not an excuse, maybe it's a microscope, maybe it's the focus we're going to have. This division is going to be difficult, right? We saw what Baltimore did last year. Everybody thought this division was going to be up for the Browns to grab because the Steelers were getting older, Baltimore was getting older. We didn't know who Lamar Jackson. All of a sudden, we know who Lamar Jackson is. He's the MVP of the league, and Baltimore doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon and just had a big-time draft class. Pittsburgh is getting Big Ben back, and Cincinnati drafted Joe Burrow and T. Higgins, and they have a young coach. So, yes, there's no excuses for Baker, but there's also a lot of pressure on Baker, right? Not only to live up to his hype, but to compete in a division that is now, again, looks like at least, it's against stacked at quarterback, and he's got to stay above Joe Burrow. Right? For a while there, it was like, well, at least Baker's going to be better than Andy Dalton. There's no guarantee he's better than Joe Burrow. And if your quarterback is the fourth best quarterback in your division, you're never going to be any good, right? You're never going to win. So there's some pressure there on Baker, and that's part of where the expectations come from. But you're right. He's got no excuses because the Browns are surrounding him with talent. I think you can make the argument in the division they have the best skill talent, right? Chubb, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, OBJ, Jarvis, the tight end group they put together. So, yeah, it's up to Baker to start playing at a level of at least close to Lamar Jackson, Ben Roethlisberger, and to stay ahead of Joe Burrow. And it'll be fascinating to see how that pans out because you have the number one pick in the draft, you spend it on Baker Mayfield, he needs to be that guy.
Yes, and that's something you stated many times before. You draft that guy first overall, he needs to be that guy, not just a run-of-the-mill guy. He needs to be the guy, no doubt about it. Well, Scott, as always, a pleasure. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll get a chance to do another one of these and see where the offseason takes us as this COVID-19 pandemic has really kind of redirected a number of different things. But hopefully we'll be able to get some semblance of an offseason before they get going again in July.
Perfect. Sounds good, Bo. Looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Scott. Again, that's Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and, of course, BrownZone.com. That's going to wrap up today's edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you again for tuning in, and we'll talk to all of you again soon.